Hi. So, as you might know, my name is Denise Onen, and I'm very excited to be answering your questions today. Such good questions. So, I'm going to start off with Kanye. Hi, Kanye. So, you asked about me being creative and have always been creative and what factors have influenced that. And I think it's one of those things where I had a lecturer who once said, you don't choose music, it chooses you. And I think that when it comes to being creative, it's actually realizing that you're creative. It takes a while to learn that. Because sometimes you're just born as you are with certain things, but it takes living to realize that. And I actually started off with art, funny enough, because my sister loved drawing. And I think watching my sister draw, I was like, I want to do that too. And with music, that came much later. But in terms of factors influencing creativity, it's definitely something that needs to be nurtured by your environment. And in terms of my home environment, having African parents, my dad is Ugandan and my mom is Zambian, there's a lot of emphasis on doing either medicine, law, accounting, engineering. There's another one, you know, IT, the big five. So I was very nerdy growing up. I read a lot. I was interested in computers and played loads of games and stuff like that. And it was easier to have academic things nurtured and cultivated that I had to make room for my creative ventures once I realized how important they were to me. So I hope that answers that question. So if I think of when I first created something of my own. I have this memory. I think I was about 4 years old, and I took all the buckets that were in our veranda and arranged them around me into what I thought a drum kit looked like, and I just started banging on them and singing in the summertime when the feeling was right. Da, 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 da. I didn't know the words, so I made the words up and I pretended that the laundry in the veranda was my audience, and when the wind blew and the clothes started moving, they were dancing and enjoying the music. So that was the first time I created something. But musically, I started piano when I was 10 years old. And that happened because I watched, as I said, I was a nerdy child. I watched anime and gamed a lot with my brother. We had a PlayStation, so we bonded over playing PlayStation. And I really loved the soundtracks and the music in games. And it was amazing when I realized that, oh my gosh, I can actually do that. And I remember begging my parents to let me have piano lessons, and I'm so glad that happened. So I even remember I have a little pianiversary every year. It's the 7th of May. And yeah, when I was 10, I had my first lesson, and I'd say my teacher was a huge influence. She really supported me and I never had a piano of my own, and that was a huge thing. So she made it that I had access to the school piano, so I would spend my breaks just taking all the music she'd given me and the books, just practicing there. I only had a little keyboard at home, so of course when it came to exams, the weight of the piano, that's something to factor in. But just having that support and like the school being willing to let me use their facilities um, was really amazing. So I think having, my teacher's name was Mrs. Lowe. Having her in my life was incredible. She used to drive me to Stedfords and to my exams, and sometimes she'd even drop me home. She was really a huge factor in that. So being able to also play on her piano, she'd also give me some time afterwards when I was waiting for my parents to fetch me some days to just play around. And I would say when I was 13, I wrote my full first piano composition, and it was called Estuary. And that is where the river's tide meets the ocean's current. And yeah, I actually played that at a composition I Stedford, which was a huge thing. My teacher was like, you must do it. And if I recall correctly, they gave me like 99%. And I mean, this is a creative thing. They don't usually give huge marks for that, but they said they were just blown away by me being so young and being able to really express the dynamic range of the piano. And what was beautiful about having the piano, it was a way for me to express myself, because I think also suffering from anxiety and depression as a child, I was very depressed and anxious, but of course didn't know how to put that into words. So I would put that into music, and that's actually why I started composing. Looking at the rest of your questions, it sort of just fits into my whole journey as a musician. So also, hi Andiswa. Thank you so much for your questions. They're really amazing questions. So the next thing I'll touch on is just in general speaking about my musical journey, but also being a Black female who's doing classical piano. So I'm really grateful that I got to go to Pretoria High School for Girls, or Pretoria Girls High as people call it. It was very intimidating going there, because that's where I started to notice the gaps in my musical training, not having a piano. That was also a big thing. Those gaps and the cracks also started showing in university, because it was such a rush and a scramble I'd learn my exam pieces. I wouldn't really be able to play for fun. It was trying to meet these deadlines and trying to meet requirements. And that was a lot of pressure. And also my parents putting pressure on me in terms of like school subjects to focus on maths and science. And the nice thing about Girls High is that's where I first discovered music technology. It's such a huge field and so hard to even put into words, that I can give you an idea of it through what I've made it for myself. At Girls High, I actually took up viola at a point, because I thought it would be easier for me musically to have an instrument that I can actually carry around and have with me all the time. And that was great, because I got to play in the orchestra, and it was so nice to be able to create music with other musicians. And also I loved that Girls High was so diverse. So it was so beautiful. For me, it was like the first time ever I came across another Black female pianist who was playing these really hard works by like Debussy and Ravel, and it was so beautiful and enchanting. And seeing someone who looks like you playing your instrument, and it's just so reassuring and reaffirming. So I'm really grateful for the environment I had at that school. At the same time, it did also bring up a lot of insecurities, because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not as good as everyone else. Oh, I have so much to do, so much learning, so much to catch up on. But it's so important to just believe in yourself as well. And I'm so glad I had teachers that believed in me and really supported me. Towards the end of my time at Girls High, in Matric, I had my first exposure to music technology. We had a project where we had to produce and create a track of our own. So I wrote this kind of sounded quite like a dullish piano song with vocals, and we used a musical software called Cakewalk, made by, I think it's Sonar. And that's so they call them DAWs, or digital audio workstations. So in those programs, you're able to record music, plug in a MIDI instrument. So it would be like a keyboard that you can pick the sounds that you're going to assign to it. And then from your keyboard, you can play any instrument. So being able to play piano, I could write a piano part, but let's say pick a guitar, and then it would be a guitar sound that would come up. And being exposed to that whole world of being able to create things in this new dimension made me think, oh my gosh, if you can make music out of all these instruments, what possibilities would be available for, let's say, composition, if you could record the sound of dripping water and make a whole soundtrack using the sound of water or nature, and those would be soundscapes. So that initial exposure to music technology was thanks to Girls High. And they also taught us notation, so that notating music, so we'd be able to take what we play and write it, notate it in programs like Finale and Sibelius, and then you'd actually be able to print out one of your works, which is so great to be able to see it on a piece of paper with the title and, let's say, your date of birth and that is composed by you. It was a very amazing thing. Yeah, so Girls High was a huge influence in my musical journey as well. And also during that time, I went through the absolute most fighting with my parents about studying music because they were hoping I'd go into, as said before, medicine, accounting. I had so many family members come to the house that my parents had asked to speak to me to be like, you can't study music, you need to be serious about your life, you're not going to make money. It was very stressful. It was awful. And I even joined, one of the greatest things for me was being able to be a part of the Girls High senior choir. With that, I got to go on my first overseas tour. I haven't been overseas since, but it was amazing to get to go to Italy with the choir and hear all these other choirs from around the world. And I really loved that. Even with the classical music that we sang, we also had a lot of African music, which was great. And I later joined the University of Pretoria Youth Choir, and that was amazing because I think my year there were about 325 kids from all around Gauteng who had auditioned, and they chose 80 of us. And I'm grateful that I was one of the 80 who was chosen because it felt like a family. It was so great to be with other people, other, I guess, kids my age who loved music and wanted to study music and really pushed and encouraged me. And my piano teacher, Mrs. Lord, also encouraged me to start piano with another teacher, Marie Snyman, who taught me a little bit of jazz as well and also prepared me for my university audition. And I'm really grateful that Marie also stepped in and spoke to my parents to convince them to study music. Because I decided that, you know what, this is what I want to do and I'm going to fight for this. And I'm glad I did. Just to add, link to the importance of being surrounded by people who support you, especially when it comes to creative things. Because I feel like, just Black African families don't understand. And I think that's also a problem, seeing this thing of doing music or doing classical music as a white thing. Because it's not. It really isn't. I loved being in UP Youth Choir so much that when my parents were like, you're quitting, I still used to go to rehearsals. Rehearsals were every Friday. What I do is I go to rehearsals and then I would leave early and catch the bus home so that I could get home just in time to be able to still like make dinner and clean things. And they didn't notice. And this went on for about 2 months, and then the gala concert was coming up, and that was a bit awkward because in that time frame of 2 months, I wasn't able to attend concerts. And I'm really glad I got to go to the gala concert. I managed to convince my parents. But being a part of the youth choir just showed me how important music is to me, but also how important it is to have people support what is important to you. And that was really something I hold dear to this day and I'm truly grateful for. Again, because UP Youth Choir was just so diverse and we had people from all sorts of different different schools and backgrounds. And to tell you a bit about UCT, in my first year, so I started in 2014, I took a leave of absence in 2015 due to mental health reasons. And so when I started at UCT, I was the only Black female classical pianist in my year. There was a Black male pianist. I'm trying to think pianists of color. Well, we're the minority either way. And a lot of the other students were at another level that I wasn't. And I remember my lecturer even telling me that I need to practice every single day. And for my first year, I remember I would stay after, we had practice rooms available after us because most people would be there practicing in the evenings until 1 a.m. when the music school closed. And I would go every day and practice, and there was a lot of pressure because I was still behind. And that's because of not having had the time to practice as much as I needed during all those years of my musical training. And it was tough. It was very hard. being the only black female pianist and in my year, and just trying to push through. And I'm so grateful that I actually switched to African instruments. And how that happened was I first came across the African music department because the problem with, I would say, the music, the classical or non-commercial music industry is that there's this hierarchy where classical is at the top, then it's jazz, and then oh yeah, there's African music, which is so wrong because African music is so beautiful. There are so many indigenous instruments and it's just so beautiful. And in 2016, when I got back, I was part of the protests at the music school. We started a collective called Inkubella. It was music students and dance students. And how we disrupted is I just remember us bringing a whole lot of drums into the foyer and African instruments and just playing music and having a good time, just jamming in the corridor, but loud enough for them not to have lectures. And the thing that we wanted to raise is just the disparities in our courses where we didn't learn enough about female composers throughout time. There wasn't an emphasis on integration between the different departments. Even the way your degree is structured, it really fits within a certain profile. And I'm glad I majored in music technology because that enabled me to be able to keep all my theory subjects in classical, have my practical subjects being African instruments, and then also having music technology as my major. And with music technology, it was hard being the only black female. We started off as 5. All the other female students dropped, and I was the only one left. And there was a huge gap between me and the male students. I had a lot of catching up to do because it wasn't just working with the notation software that we had worked with in high school. It was working in studios and having a mixer in front of you and learning new software and how to do all these things. And I was actually kicked out of my first lecture because I angered the lecturer for not knowing anything. That is how little I knew. It was very embarrassing. But after that happened, I remember downloading the manual for the mixer, watching a whole lot of YouTube videos, asking so many questions and writing them down in a book. And I went to my lecturer and I'm like, I don't know anything. I just came from high school and I'm not at the same level as the other students, but I am willing to learn. I want to learn because this is amazing. I didn't know this stuff existed. And he really appreciated that. And on the other side of it, we were exposed to this new component of creative programming. I'll send you some examples, but it's like using code to incorporate visuals into music. So it's the kind of thing where based on the frequencies or the sound of the music, you'll have visuals that respond to it. Or you could have a program that based on how a dancer is moving, them raising their arm makes a certain sound. So it would be like, woo kind of thing. There's unlimited possibilities, and that's what I loved about music technology. And I chose that. I switched when I realized that this was all that was possible. I switched my major from composition to music technology. And also being a part of protest was actually the first time I came across African instruments, because I remember I was sitting next to someone and they started playing the imbira, and I was like, this is so beautiful. And they actually taught me the song that they were playing. And I was taken aback by that, because I was just like, within the African music department, there is that, it sounds so cheesy, but there really is that spirit of Ubuntu. And it was also for me a really big transition in that, being a foreigner in South Africa, I've been subject to a lot of xenophobia, and it's that thing of being nervous in white spaces, but even being nervous in spaces that are predominantly Black South African spaces. And that was a time where I'm like, oh my gosh, I can embrace my experience of Blackness, and we can celebrate all our different experiences of being of color together. And yeah, after that I switched to African music, also because of protesting. another reason I had to switch to African music was because I failed piano by 1%. They really could have passed me, and I do believe the reason they didn't pass me was because during protest I had told off a bunch of lecturers in front of a group of students just about the disparities within the department and how our true creative expression is stifled because we have to stick to this thing of you're only allowed to interpret, and my interpretation was always wrong. And there were a lot of people there were a lot of problems in the department, and I brought them up and I voiced it, and they weren't happy about that. And because I was failed by 1%, and there was also another piano course accompanying that I failed, that was on me because I didn't practice because I was stressed and also just made a joke of the exam. But that meant I faced academic exclusion. So that meant that if I failed one course in the following year, I would be kicked out of UCT. And that was in 2017. And during that year, I actually ended up being voted in as the chair of the Music Students Council. And from there, I was able to voice the concerns of the students in a way that I couldn't be. They can't really mark me down for that, because it's an independent body for the students, and it's that there are these concerns, and there are these concerns coming from Black students as well, and they need to be heard. So I was on the Music Students Council, and at that time, then I had switched to African instruments, and it was such a beautiful environment because they encouraged true creative expression. They even said that I should even try to incorporate what I know from classical into African instruments. And with that, there were so many instruments, but the ones that I really bonded with were the mbira and also the African harp. And I feel like it was just meant to be, because I'll never forget the day one of my lecturers walked up to me and was like, "Oh, your surname's Onen." And I was like, "Yes." And he's like, "That's a Luo surname." So Luo are the southern Kenyan, northern Ugandan people. And you're saying, the Luo African harps, they actually have the same encryptions that were found on harps in Babylon. And I was taken aback, because that's like thousands of years of history that I didn't even know about. And it's as if that's the instrument of my ancestors, and we found each other. And we're playing African harp. There were some CDs that my dad used to play by Jeffrey Oriema, and I actually played some of his songs on African harp, which I'll send you a recording of. And it was such a beautiful experience. And they even encouraged me to incorporate music technology as well. So I actually had a program that responded to the sounds of me playing. In the background, these visuals were happening while I played. So I wrote a song called Lanyeng, which means something which is confusing or puzzling, for African harp, mbira, and viola. And it was so great to be able to create this Afro-classical music. And that was a very beautiful part of my experience at UCT. And I also used that time to get involved with film students, because I loved composing, but I also love sound design. So that's all the sound effects that go into, that's actually just all the sound in film, whether it's dialogue, people speaking, or sound effects from a door opening to footsteps, and syncing those little details all together. I really loved that. And also just getting the levels right and making sure that it will sound good off a phone versus a computer or a TV. So that would be like all the way from recording to the mastering process. And I really did go above and beyond. And the reason for that is being a Black female in the industry. I am now in the industry, but I made sure I learned everything and was really good at it. And when I graduated, I did graduate with a distinction in music technology, but that was also because when you are a minority and being a Black female, where this is an industry for cis het white males, I always have to prove myself. And being someone who learns, I do that anyway, but it also has to show on paper. And people will always doubt one within these spaces, but I'm not going to stand for that. being black and female in the music industry, sort of with the foot in the classical world, sort of with music technology, I sometimes work as a live sound engineer. And that is one of those situations where, as I said, I am the minority of minorities. And when in those spaces, they're the kind of spaces that will make you want to shrink, but that is the time when you need to take up space. And I mean, there have been times where people, I used to play in a band, thought I was a groupie, someone just there, and it's like, no, I'm in the band and I'm the sound engineer, or I'll actually get one of my bandmates to introduce me. Otherwise, I just won't be taken seriously. So it's also a matter of getting allies to support one. That's very important. But just back to that, it's so important to take up space and to not be afraid to take up space. And I've also had friends along this journey who've encouraged me to take up space, because it is so easy to shrink in those spaces that make you feel small. And by doing that, I've managed to connect with some amazing people, and I've managed to work on some film sets. I've managed to work on projects where it is a team of just people of color. I've worked on projects where it's just queer people of color. And it's so important to also make one's own space with these creative ventures. You can think like a creative. You can get creative about how you want to work and get involved, and you can create spaces that are there for you and for you. So I would highly encourage that. And it does get better along the way. Can definitely say that, and you get better at getting better and learning how things work. It's terrifying being in the industry, but there is also a lot of hope, and people are constantly learning. And even though it's also easy to be invisible as a black female, people are learning that we are people and they need to see us and know how to accommodate us and be sensitive to the unique struggles that we face. Also, just as black people in general. And yeah, it's been very beautiful along the years to also see some of my classmates who are black flourish along the way. And it has truly been an amazing experience. And I would never take back studying music. I'm so grateful that I did. And I'm grateful that I majored in music technology, because it enabled me to still be able to compose and be able to do everything and anything that is not just music, but sound and music under the whole umbrella. I could write a song, I could mix a song, I could transcribe, I could arrange music. Maybe not jazz, because I'm not as experienced, but yeah, I can be at a live show and support the acts by being the engineer. Or I could be on the other side, on stage performing. And it is just amazing to be able to fit into all those spheres. And yeah, I think it is up to schools and universities and systems over time to change, to be able to make more room for African music. And I'm glad more people are slowly but surely learning about it. I know that in Cape Town, I've seen a lot of my peers have shows, and there've been a lot of people trying to encourage people to go to their shows and experience this and see it and learn that African music is so special. Other exposure to, let's say, African instruments was through doing capoeira. I only did it for 2 months, but that was the first time I heard of berimbau, which I think we would call an uhadi, the calabash with the and a whole lot of other instruments. But yeah, there really is space for us as black classical musicians, and the world is learning about us. I think something else encouraging that I'd like to add is there's a Baroque orchestra called the Camerata Tinta Barocca, and they play Baroque music and period instruments, and there are people of color in that orchestra. This is something that most people will associate with only old white people listening to, but no, there are black musicians in that space, and it is incredible. So I'm here to say, even though I am it's wrong that I am the first, or was the first, black queer female to get a degree in, a Bachelor of Music specializing in music technology. But I'm also glad that as the first, I can sit here and say that there is definitely more room for us. And with being the first, I'm glad that I have paved some sort of way. And by the time you're in university or figuring out what you want to do, that if you decide to do music, that you won't have to go through a lot of what I did, because I've tried to pave a way for students like you. La